Sometimes you need to take a step back and really rebuild, almost burn it all down in order to get something that is going to be sustainable for the future. And I think I did that with my burn down my operations career to get into finance, and then burn down my finance career to get into the law. And then we've taken that step with this company, effectively burning down the technology that we had been building, and then my partners and the founders have been building back on the mainland.
Jonathan Feniak stumbled into life in paradise, less taxes, tech talent readily available, life on the beach. Listen in as he explains how he burned it all to the ground to start over, and the amazing repercussions of being willing to do so. The limited partner shares in the potentially outsized returns of a well-planned and executed investment, but as a passive investor, and has the maximum leverage on their most precious asset, their time. And that is why we're here together. 90% of the millionaires out there built their net worth with real estate. However, 0% of the billionaires are hands-on managing the real estate assets because there simply isn't enough time. My name is Jake Wiley, and for the past 16 years, I've been investing in real estate, and I've learned a thing or two. But the most important lesson is how to leverage the expertise and time of others to maximize your investment potential. Welcome to the Limited Partner Podcast. Welcome, partners. This is your host again, Jake Wiley. This week, I'm joined by Jonathan Feniak. So he is the general counsel at Company Sage. I think, Jonathan, I'm really eager to get into this conversation because I know you just moved to Puerto Rico, and I think there's going to be an interesting tax angle later in the show. But first and foremost, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, this is kind of already set the stage, but maybe I'll hand it back to you real quick and give us a little bit of background on your journey. I know this is like your third career, and there's been a recent move. International is my first international guest, kind of, sort of. So I'm eager to get into it.
Well, we're still U.S. citizens, so that's the beauty of Puerto Rico. So not quite international.
Almost.
Almost. Close enough. So yeah, I did have an interesting journey. Started out transportation and logistics out of undergrad, worked in Manhattan, was there on 9/11, had drivers out on the road delivering packages. Very tough industry. Decided I wanted to get out of it. And so went and got an MBA. That allowed me to move into, I actually worked for a number of hedge funds, was a partner at a hedge fund. We did a lot of alternative financings, public-private companies, complex stuff that to this day, I sort of shake my head and say, okay, yeah, that worked. And then was a financial advisor. So I became a licensed 7 and 63 securities licensed individual, was an insurance broker. And so was able to sell life and other insurance policies, and then had sort of a life-changing event and decided that law was really for me. Not looking to throw out my experience from the prior decade, but instead to leverage it. Talk to a lot of attorneys who came to the law right out of undergrad. There are a lot of interesting attorneys out there who have done things like run companies and do have that real world experience, but I think they're becoming fewer and farther between. And so I decided to go to law school and really try to leverage the experience I had in the real world, both investing as well as running operations and dealing with employees and customers. And that's how I originally came to a company called Cloud Peak Law. Forms about a third of the LLCs in Wyoming, doing about 2,000 company formations each and every month, and participated in the growth of that company. And got me to where I am today in Puerto Rico, which is a sort of a story we can get into now. I can keep talking. It's interesting. And this is something you and I were talking before we started recording. Sometimes you need to take a step back and really rebuild, almost burn it all down in order to get something that is going to be sustainable for the future. And I think I did that with my burn down my operations career to get into finance, and then burn down my finance career to get into the law. And then we've taken that step with this company, effectively burning down the technology that we had been building, and then my partners and the founders have been building back on the mainland. That's what we call it, the contiguous 50 states. Building that technology that was just built all wrong. It wound up not working at scale. And so what we did is we found a development team. We found a key developer who was based here in Puerto Rico, and we were trying to build a team around him. Incredibly difficult to find technology talent up on the mainland, but there is a huge wealth of talent, technology talent down here in Puerto Rico. And so we started building a technology team here to try to make this technology actually work, because it just didn't. It was starting to, the cracks were starting to show. And so we moved I don't want to say move the company, started over in Puerto Rico with our technology platform. It's called Company Sage. We power Cloud Peak Law, and we power entity formation companies all over the mainland, providing asset protection and privacy to our clients.
Well, I think that's really interesting. And, talking about kind of burning it all down, because one, just so you feel better, you're not the only people that have tried to implement technology and got almost to the end and realized like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to completely start over. So, but I think you guys taking the opportunity to kind of restructure in a big way, right? I mean, you're physically in Puerto Rico now, right? And that's really interesting. So, right off the bat, I'd love to know, you indicated right before the show, there's some tax benefits. I'd love to know what that is. And then, maybe we can figure out a way to tie that into maybe what a limited partner would be looking for.
Yeah, Puerto Rico really wants folks to come here and build businesses. And that's exactly what we're doing. Hiring our tech team, we're adding a customer service team down here, a bilingual customer service team, as well as an English speaking service team. We all know how difficult it is to hire people right now. It's actually not that difficult here, right? There's a higher unemployment rate, a very educated workforce, and this bilingual workforce. But the tax benefits are that if you start a company in Puerto Rico, and it can be an LLC that you then select C Corp taxation for, the corporation has a 2 to 4% tax rate, depending on a number of variables, but distributions, dividends, zero tax. So the owners of the company will pay, or the company will pay that 2 to 4% tax, but then those dividends to the owners are going to be untaxed. And so the way it works is you sign a contract with the government of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has this interesting place in the world in that Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. And so there's people who try to leave the U.S. to avoid U.S. taxation. They quickly learn that United States taxes your income globally, wherever it is. There may be some exclusions, but they're taxing it globally. So then people say, well, I'm going to renounce my citizenship and then move to some tax haven. Okay, well, then you're not a U.S. citizen anymore. There's all sorts of problems with. The beauty of Puerto Rico is that there's a special tax treaty between the territory of Puerto Rico and the U.S. government. And it says that they can do these kinds of things. They collect their own taxes. They do not collect federal taxes. They collect their own taxes here on the island. And as a corporation, we're going to pay that somewhere between 2 and 4% of our income to the state, I should say, to the territory. But that other income is not going to be taxed to us. So that's under something called Act 60. There's something else that's really interesting under Act 60 is that you can file personally, and capital gains are untaxed under that structure. So there are some caveats, right? So if you have assets and you have source income, say you own real estate in New York, that's not going to be exempt from the federal tax on capital gains. But if you have assets which don't have a physical location in space, you're a stock trader, you're a crypto trader, something like that, then the capital gains on those assets are not going to be taxed. And it could be, LPs are probably also getting some exposure to REITs and things like that. Those would be potentially untaxed. Or if they're investing in just stocks in real estate companies that are listed on an exchange, those are going to be untaxed here in Puerto Rico. From the perspective of an individual who is a real estate owner on the mainland, one of the things that's potentially that they can do is you set up your management company. And we think about, how much of the management of a real estate portfolio really has anything to do with being in Texas or where the property is. So much of it is happening behind the scenes, your executive offices. And so you effectively move your executive offices to Puerto Rico and then enter into management services agreements with onshore entities, right? The onshore entities hiring a contractor to fix the sidewalk of a property in Texas Well, it's a management role. That's not a on the ground sort of Texas role. And so there's individuals down here in Puerto Rico who are real estate investors who are doing those sorts of things. So there's obviously a lot of complexity to it. I'm not licensed in Puerto Rico, but I've been through it. And so I can speak to it there. I'm licensed in Wyoming and Colorado, but it presents an interesting opportunity. One of the things about Puerto Rico is that it's a high income country. And I think there's sort of, people will often come in and they go to places like a San Juan. They're like, well, it's very touristy. I don't live in the tourist section. I live in a neighborhood. My neighbor is an accountant. My other neighbors are attorneys, and there's politicians and doctors and alike. And so there's wonderful areas of Puerto Rico where you can spend your weekends on the beach, living in a beautiful place with a very educated population. And you can potentially, I want to say, avoid mainland taxation, but help build something down here. Our taxes are being used by the territory to benefit the people of Puerto Rico.
I mean, that's fascinating. We've heard of all these different, multi-country tax strategies, but just moving headquarters to Puerto Rico. And I mean, I got to imagine that Puerto Rico is not a bad place to live. What's the cost of living like down there comparably?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So there's sort of these enclaves. There's properties within gated communities, like the Four Seasons has has a gated community, and properties there are going for $30 to $50 million. Then there's other properties, still gated communities, very nice. You can buy an acre of land for under $500,000 with an existing home on it. Nice area, feel extremely safe. And we came from Denver, and Denver, we were living sort of inner city Denver. And there was a lot of problems in Denver. I think about the opioid crisis, which has, it's an epidemic that has just struck so many in these communities, which then leads to, the unhoused or homeless issues in many cities. And so in terms of Puerto Rico is an easy place to live. The cost of living is low. And so you don't see any of those problems. There's also very close-knit and religious families here who take care of each other, right? They don't let that family member go astray effectively, where I think we may have lost a lot of that up on the mainland. And so incredibly welcoming population with a low cost of living. There are some things that are more expensive. If you want to get a broccoli, down here for some reason is $6 a pound. I'm not sure why, but then you can get, for some reason, beef is a very inexpensive down here. And so, there's sort of these trades off. Fish is amazing, and the local fruits and vegetables are amazing. So great, actually a great place to live. You do need to sever your ties. You can't have a significant. So there's all these rules, and I'm just sort of, cherry picking.
That's where I was going next. Is like, what's the, I guess, the small print
requirement?
Here. Yeah, some of
the small print. Have to actually live here, right? You can't fake it, right? If you're saying, I'm gonna keep my house and my family's going to live up in Texas or in North Carolina, and then I'm just going to say I live here, that's tax fraud. You're going to go to jail. So you moved to Puerto Rico, right? And so it really worked for my wife and I. Our kids are grown, and she's an artist. And so her work was very portable, what she could do. And so you need to live here for at least 6 months out of every year, 6 months and a day. I think if you're approaching it, well, I'm only going to be here for 6 months, maybe it's not right for you. You need to sign this decree. There's some fees associated with that. One of the interesting things, which is something, I wouldn't call it negative, is that you are required to donate a pretty significant amount to a Puerto Rican charity. Right. So you can pick whatever charity you want, but that is one of the requirements. You have to register to vote here. You have to get your driver's license. You get your car. You have a requirement to buy real property, real estate, a primary residence here. You couldn't buy a piece of vacant land, but it could be a condo that you buy and then you Airbnb it out for the, 6 months minus a day that you're not on the island. So there are some of those restrictions, opening up bank accounts. Basically, you got to build your life here. If you're not willing to do that, don't do it. That's tax fraud. You're going to wind up going to jail. Also, get counsel. There's some, when it comes to businesses and, whether you're moving a business here or as we are basically having to start from scratch here, there's some things you definitely need to be concerned about. And we've got some great advisors in in those areas, because there's definitely complexity, and there's a lot of, I don't know, a lot, some people have been taking advantage or trying to play the games, and, don't mess with the IRS. That's one of don't mess with the Department of Justice. Don't mess with the IRS. All other sort of partners you may run into, I think you're okay with, but, do the right thing. And that's what all of us are doing. And we're also, we're hiring people and putting, already hundreds of thousands, probably close to $500,000 worth of salaries into the Puerto Rican economy with the people we're hiring, and causing, or preventing a brain drain on the island, because these are really well-paying tech jobs that you can't even hire people. Even if you wanted to on the mainland, it'd be very difficult to hire people for these positions.
That's a pretty compelling case. I might have to talk with my wife after this conversation and see, like, how do you feel about Puerto Rico?
Well, what we did is we spent, well, my wife and I were actually married here, but then we spent a month here and really got to know it. And I got to tell you, you're in North Carolina. I'm from Denver, and it's really dry in Denver, and the humidity was something definitely to get accustomed to. But once you open up the windows like I'm doing here, and you get the breezes blowing through, it's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. No coats, no winter shoes, no shoveling snow anymore.
Yeah, I like it. We're going to we will talk about it. I don't, it's not going to, probably not going to start off as a real serious conversation, but it'll come up. Let's pivot a little bit here. Let's talk about asset protection, right? Because that's really important. And I think that you probably can attest. And I mean, I know people, and there's always horror stories of, like asset protection is probably sometimes last on the list, but probably shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And as we think about investing, we were like, again, before the show, we were kind of chatting about it, and like kind of the typical progression of, you start small by yourself, and then you move into a company, and then you get some size, and then you're like, you know what, maybe I'd rather be a limited partner. So here we are, which I think is kind of the relevance of the show. But what should our limited partners be looking for in terms of asset protection? What are some things that you've seen that have gone sideways, and what are some kind of best in class practices?
Yeah, here's an interesting one. And part of asset protection is privacy, right? Where I had a client when I was a financial advisor, and the client was an investor in Bernie Madoff, right? So he was in there, and no one would have known about his failure except that he invested in his personal name. And so when the bankruptcy filing went through, everyone knew at that point, when you searched for this person, oh, what is this, person up to? You'd find him. He was an investor in Bernie Madoff. And so that automatically triggers when people are like, well, heck, maybe he's not so smart, or maybe he is engaging some criminal contact. The other thing I think about is, when you're a limited partner, I don't know who my other limited partners are, right? I don't know who these people are, but if somebody sees, you were a limited partner with Jeffrey Dahmer, or with, Jeffrey Epstein, you were a partner with, how could you do that? Right. And so I never talked to that person. I don't know who they were, but there's something to be said about never investing in a limited partnership in your personal name. You should be investing through your holding company or some entity. Even if you've got your trust, you're investing through a trust. I recommend form that underneath your trust, and that becomes the investing vehicle to keep that layer of privacy away from you. We know that limited partners are not going to be held responsible for the obligations. If someone slips and falls on that real estate, you're not going to be held responsible. But that privacy is absolutely fantastic. You can't get it back once you've lost it. And so setting up your holding company, Wyoming is a great place to do it as well, because Wyoming, you don't have to list the names of the owners or the managers of that LLC, that holding company, in the Secretary of State records. We're the only ones who know, or our partners in Wyoming are the only ones who know who you are, and there's an obligation there to maintain that information. So that's absolutely something to think about from the asset protection perspective, from the privacy perspective as well. And we had talked about, again, that progression: start on your own, start picking up some properties, move them maybe into LLCs, then you go into holding structure, then you're like, I don't want to do this anymore, and you start investing as a limited partner. But I'm sure many of the folks who are listening still have those real estate portfolios, those personal real estate portfolios. And the unfortunate thing is, if there is liability, somebody slips and falls on that single piece of property they have and hurts themselves, and it's a big enough claim, and they come after that individual, they may be able to lay claim to their limited partnership interest, right? So they may be able to get a hold of that in some way, foreclose on it. And so if you own it inside of an LLC, there's something in Wyoming called charging order protection. And that means that a charging order or a judgment creditor of an individual member of an LLC, that judgment creditor cannot break into the LLC and seize the assets. The best they can do is sit on the outside and wait for a distribution to be made, which you're not under an obligation to make a distribution. You can allocate the gains, though, to that judgment creditor and cause them to have a phantom income tax bill due. And so protecting your limited partnership interest from claims against you as an individual. We know those claims are not going to flow up through a limited partnership, but what if you have a terrible accident? What if there's some other part of your business, you're an executive and someone comes after you? Are they going to be able to get to those limited partnership interests and foreclose on them? And it depends a lot on the laws of the state in which that limited partnership is governed by. Some states have charging order protection as the exclusive remedy. Sometimes it only applies to LLCs. You're not really sure, but what I can tell you is that Wyoming, it is the sole remedy of a judgment creditor of a member. So you are going to be able to shield those investments from claims of your personal creditors. Huge benefit there. So we think about it from top down. The other thing is when you get to even more advanced asset protection planning is Wyoming is one of the states. There's 3 or 4 of them. So you got South Dakota, you've got Nevada, you've got Wyoming, and then there's some others floating around that have these very protective, self-settled asset protection trusts. They're known domestic asset protection trusts. Sometimes they're called generational trusts, a lot of different names for them, legacy trust. And what you can do with them is by contributing your wealth into the asset protection trust, you can shield it not just from a charging order, but anyone who's coming after you is not going to be able to touch those assets, which are held by your Wyoming Asset Protection Trust with a holding company with then those limited partnership interests below that. You're going to be very well protected. And so no matter what happens in your life, you're going to be able to go on to fight another day because those assets will be preserved. Those are also interesting, the asset protection trust. When you think about failed marriages, a lot of marriages fail, a very high percentage fail. And prenups have taken a real beating. There's a lot of challenges with creating an enforceable prenup, as well as sort of the conversations you need to have leading up to that. One of the things you can do is to draw a very firm line in the sand of what is a part of the marital estate and what is not. And if you have assets that you've contributed into a asset protection trust, those are going to be protected from claims of your future ex-spouse, your future or your current spouse. If you are married, one of the other things you can do is prevent those assets that you've grown together. You got married right out of high school or out of college, and you're building wealth together. Sometimes divorces happen. What you can do is move assets into the asset protection trust, and whether you guys are together or not, those assets will always go to your children. They're not going to go to the children if somebody remarries and has other kids, or that new, husband or new wife who may come into the picture. Those assets are protected from them as well. So there's a lot of really interesting things. I view your listeners as high net worth individuals. And so high net worth individuals have to think about, where the attack's going to come from. And sometimes they're coming from the outside, but sometimes they're coming from, there's that old saying, it's in the house, right? The call's coming from in the house, I think is the thing, right? So sometimes the danger is inside.
Yeah, I think what I really like when you first started talking to you is the privacy aspect, right? Because, these things go sideways in business, and having that layer of protection from just a privacy perspective, like your name's not popping up. And, especially the higher the profile of the failing, right, the further up the Google stream it's going to be, right? So you type somebody's name, and it's really interesting how this happens. And everybody's probably experienced this. Like, you type somebody's name to do a search on it, and you may find some legal document, right? Because it's just out there, and it's like on the front page of Google. And I thought that, I think that's great advice, because it seems so simple. It's like, look, I've got the limited liability protection via, being a limited partner, but like, it's just me investing. It's like, well, hold on, let me just put one layer in between. And then obviously Wyoming adds a whole nother layer of protection from the state perspective and privacy there too. But I guess let's think about those of us that are probably not well set up, right? Maybe we do have some assets that, from a million years ago that, we bought in our own name, and What's your advice? Like, what should we be doing to kind of clear that up, or maybe take the right first step?
Yeah. And at our heart, we're a tech company. And I talk to a lot of our, our information security folks. They view it as attack surfaces, right? How can you reduce the attack surfaces? What are people going to be able to find? And where will that aggressive plaintiff's attorney or divorce attorney, where will they be able to pick and figure out what the heck is going on here? And there's going to be once you don't have privacy, it's really hard to get it back. And so what we've developed is something we call the dirty holding company versus the clean holding company, right? We want that charging order protection. We want those protections that an LLC affords. And so the question is, well, do I just forget about all the things I've done in the past? No. Let's set up the dirty holding company, which is connected to you in some way, in some public record. And you're going to take all of your existing sort of liability that you're worried about flowing to you personally. You're going to put it in there. You're going to assign your limited partnership interest to that LLC. Maybe when the filing is made in the bankruptcy court or something else, your name is not listed. It's the LLC, maybe not, right? Those properties you own in your personal name, you're probably going to be connected to those properties in the title records for forever. I mean, that's the nature of title records. But depending on how the states do indexing, maybe it doesn't show up on the first link, or maybe, Property Shark or one of these others doesn't pick it up because you've now made that change to where it is an LLC, or maybe just people gloss over it because like, oh, he's not the owner anymore. This LLC is, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then you've got your clean holding company. Your clean holding company is going to be for everything from this day forward. Your clean holding company is going to be how you purchase limited partnership interest and how you're going to use that holding company forming a subsidiary in the state in which the property is located. And you're going to acquire that property there. And your business ventures, you're going to invest in your next business idea is through your holding company. So everything going forward is in the clean, but we're not going to infect those clean with this attack surface. We're not going to introduce an attack surface to your clean holding company setup. The beauty of at least Wyoming LLC, some states get ridiculous in terms of what they charge, but a Wyoming LLC, we charge $199 to set it up, and then it's $159 a year to maintain. We're not talking about a lot here. And once it's set up, not much you need to do. We give you the opportunity to do with our tech platform, new additions to the tech platform, things like meeting minutes, contribution meeting minutes, distribution meeting minutes, annual meeting minutes, and a lot of other things, sort of the day-to-day, trying to make it easy to maintain your entities are the things we do, but really easy to administer, especially what we're talking about here on a going forward basis. So spend a little bit of money to get this set up, dirty and clean holding companies. And I think you can sleep a little bit easier at night with that.
And one of the things you said there, which I like to harp on when I give people advice, is that just because you set up an LLC, and really just say like Wyoming, maybe it's a little bit more protection. There are some like minimum requirements that you have to do to kind of make it seem like it is a business, right? It's separate. Right. There's minutes and there's just things that you have to accomplish. And it sounds like you guys have a platform that helps. All right, we need to do this. You need to do that. You need to document this. It's not, again, to your point, it's not a lot, but you have to do something. It's not hey, we got an LLC. We set it up like 30 years ago.
We're good.
We're good, right?
What have you ever done? No, it doesn't have a bank account, doesn't have an EIN, and never did any, yeah.
Right.
I'm 100% with you. And one of the things we're trying to do with Company Sage is really add those things on and make it easy for you to do them. Not in a pushy way, right? Some people, this is old hat. But if you're coming in, you're like, oh, when I set my LLC, but then I need an EIN, and then I need a bank account, and then I need an operating agreement, and then I need this and I need that. We're making it easy to do all those things. Sort of a couple of clicks, obviously a little bit of cost associated with them, but a couple of clicks, and you can really get it up and running. And then we're prompting you whenever you're making changes, or annually on a quarterly basis, whatever, do the meeting minutes. Okay, get this to where it actually is offering, or I should say delivering on the promised protections of limited liability.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to finalize this, is that you got to do something. It's not a lot, but just make sure you do it, because it's one of the these small things that'll trip you up.
What one last thing.
Yeah.
Wyoming has something. It's I don't know that any other state has it, maybe one other state. It's called a close, CLOSE, limited liability company. Okay. And a close limited liability company, when the legislature was getting together, they called them kitchen table companies. Me and you have a company, we're brothers, we ain't keeping no fancy minutes, right? Or it's just you and your spouse. And so what they said was, on a close limited liability company, okay, as long as you do, there's only a very small number of things you need to do. As long as you do those small number of things, you can't come after the company and try to invalidate it because it didn't have all of these annual meeting minutes and records and the like. And so it makes it very easy in Wyoming. Choose a close LLC if you're forming one, because it takes away that burden. Now, a judge in Texas or a judge in Florida may want to disregard it if you don't have those records. And that's what I worry about when people form a close LLC. I don't need to do these things. I still think you do it, but it gives you that get out of jail free card, right? We don't have good meeting minutes. Well, our meeting minutes are pretty good. They're not perfect, but we didn't need to keep them anyway. So anything else, just icing on the cake. That's the argument I want to give your attorney to be able to.
That's a great point. Well, Jonathan, this has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it. It's late on Friday afternoon, so I know this is kind of the last thing for both of us. So yeah, thank you for making the time and hanging in there with me. Really appreciate having you here.
It was absolutely a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. We'll talk soon. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'd actually love for you to contribute to a future episode. If you have a question you'd like answered, or a topic or a guest to bring on the show, please email me at jake@thelimitedpartner.com. Now I realize there's a lot of lingo that's thrown around on these shows, so I've created a cheat sheet for you with the top 26 terms that come up most often. Head on over to thelimitedpartner.com/lingo for the list. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time.